So I am up at 12:14 a.m. on an early Friday morning as I set up to finish off the first episode of the Regression of Gaming podcast. Technically, it's not the first episode. This is the first Roundtable episode. This topic is Final Fantasy, and I have two of my very good friends, Mike Thorne and Allie Douglas, talk about all the different Final Fantasy games we can think of, comparing them against each other, which ones were good, which ones were bad, and just mindless banter for a little while. The actual conversation runs about 54 minutes, so I hope you enjoy. This is the Regression of Gaming podcast, Roundtable Episode 1, Final Fantasy. That's okay. Good. All right, cool. So we're actually talking about basically Final Fantasy. That's what we're talking about. Anything under the sun that has to do with the Final Fantasy game series. Myself, I've actually been playing. I actually played Final Fantasy VI when it was called Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo. And actually, I have two people on here with me who can actually talk. So please introduce yourselves.
My name is Mike Thorne. I've been playing Final Fantasy since. Let's go with Final Fantasy Legend 1 for Game Boy, which is not technically main series. My first main series game would be FF4, and I played that on SNES as well when it came out as FF2. And I've played most of the main series, missed a couple, but pretty much everything.
All right. I'm Allie Douglas. I'm the youngest one here, and a consequence of that is actually I haven't played as many Final Fantasy games, and I started with 7 when I was in high school. So I've played a few of the main games. I've also played 14 and things like that as well, and some of the spin-off games like Tactics and Bravely Default as well.
Mm-hmm. And to add on to what I've done, I actually have played the original Final Fantasy on the Nintendo. I have recently played Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy III, the Japanese versions. I have played most of the Final Fantasy series, 1 through 14. I have played Tactics. I have not played Crisis Core or Dissidia or any of the other offshoots. I have played the original Final Fantasy Legend for the Game Boy, and I think Legend 2. There were several for the Game Boy. As well, but that's the extent of my Final Fantasy knowledge. Let's go ahead and actually get started. Where is Final Fantasy now? What is the direction of this franchise? Because when I started playing, I thought it was the greatest thing ever, and then when I played 7, I was like all googly-eyed, like, ooh, this is so pretty. Where is it at?
What I would say. Well, it depends on what you're looking at, because there's every game in the Final Fantasy franchise is fairly complex. I'd say, like, the biggest thing is it's getting more accessible, I guess, in a lot of ways. And I don't know, Mike might have more to say about that, though.
Such a complicated question. I mean, 13 was just a radically different. Both, 13 and 14 are such radical direction changes for the franchise, and they're so different from each other as well. Obviously, Final Fantasy XI is still a vibrant game with an active community, and 14 is around now too, and they're continually adding to 14. So, it almost feels like 14 is going to become this permanent game even after 15, 16, 17, 18 come out. 14 is going to be with us for a long time. If 13 is the judge of where the non-MMO series is going, then it feels to me like it's part of this slow merger between movies and video games. And Final Fantasy is actually not the original champion of that theory, the theory that video games and movies would merge. It was actually a Metal Gear Solid game. What's his name? Kojima. He came out with this theory back in the PlayStation 1 era that video games would slowly merge into movies, and that they'd be essentially movies with a minimal amount of gameplay in them.
Yeah, I think Sakaguchi's also said that in his interviews with when 7 was finished and they were doing a lot of pressers. He said something very similar to it. I don't have the actual quote, but he actually talked about how they were games were moving into a direction of almost an interactive movie type setting where the line between movies and games would start blurring.
Right, and you see that a little bit in 7, a little bit in 8, a little bit in 9, and then, a little bit in 12, but then 13, 13 is almost the full realization of that.
Yeah, and I think another aspect, though, which I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, is it's more, it's more for, geared towards casual people. The 13's more automatic in a lot of ways than, say, something like 6 or 7. So I think some people who were really old Final Fantasy fans feel like newer games for the main series, not the MMOs necessarily, are kind of a slap in the face because it's more for geared towards a broader audience than rather hardcore fans. And they're not as fantastical and the same kind of worlds as Final Fantasy fans were used to that have been playing since it came over to America.
And maybe that could be part of the issue with 13 in general, as you were saying, whereas casual people could pick up 13 and look at it and say, oh wow, this is just a wonderful, a vibrant environment, an vibrant game, whereas people like myself, I spent 100 plus hours in 13, and I think it's garbage. I honestly think it's not good.
It's the prettiest corridor I've ever seen, John.
That is the perfect way to describe it. It is visually stunning. It's a pretty game.
No, it's a pretty corridor.
Yes.
Don't insult games.
But that's one thing, I think that's one thing almost every Final Fantasy game has, though. You always feel like, oh, it's so pretty. And if you view it in the aspect of, its console, its generation, things like that.
Yeah, they always look much better than any other game of the same era.
Also,
or, even 14, if you look at MMOs right now, if you look at something like a WoW or something, Final Fantasy looks much prettier, I think. But I don't play WoW, so my knowledge of WoW is based off screenshots and stuff, so that might not be the fairest comparison.
No, it's totally true.
Yeah,
totally true.
I've only played a total of 2.5 hours of WoW. And I could say that 11 looks a lot better than WoW, so.
Well, if 11 looks better than WoW, then 14 is just blowing it away.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a graphical update WoW has, so I don't know. That could be another topic I'll have later on.
14 is kind of a very different generation from WoW. WoW is more the Final Fantasy 11 generation. So if we want to look at 14 in the context of its own generation, we should be comparing it against things like Guild Wars 2. And if you look at 14 versus Guild Wars 2, they have about the same graphics quality, I think, but 14 does a much better job of using that quality.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same level of quality of backgrounds and landscapes, but 14's world just feels so much more pretty and it's much more beautiful. The armor and weaponry is much better done, so it takes advantage of the engine a lot better than, say, Guild Wars 2 does in the same generation.
But does the online games like 11 and 14, does it deserve its own numerical number in the Final Fantasy franchise, or should it just be Final Fantasy Online 1 and 2?
Well, that's kind of a marketing question more than anything. I mean, from a certain perspective, it's such a different game that, I think it should be its own name.
Well, and one thing I would say, early on in playing 14, me and Mike have both expressed, it didn't really feel like it was linked to Final Fantasy in any way, and it was just attached by a name. But as you go through and play it, it actually becomes very clear that there are a lot of throwbacks to other games, and there is this real attempt at trying to make it like a Final Fantasy world, things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. It barely feels like Final Fantasy for the first 20 levels or something like that. So.
Yeah. And I know I have to get back on Final Fantasy 14 and join back up and do this. Honestly, I got a little bored because I felt like I wasn't really going anywhere.
You really gotta get past the first few levels. So, because I understand what you're saying, because actually it took me a really long time to start playing every day. I was playing like maybe a couple times a week, and once I got over a certain threshold, it became a lot more interesting. And the other thing is I've noticed, is 14 is not really like a casual game. It's not like an everyman's MMO.
Mm-hmm.
If you like go on forums and things for Final Fantasy, it's almost like gibberish because the people who are so like into it speak in almost their own language and things like that. And that's kind of what you need to be able to play the game to the fullest enjoyment, it seems like.
Yeah, I've got item level over 100 on one character, and another class is about to hit 50. And a month ago, I understood probably about a third of what was being said on the Final Fantasy 14 forums. Like literally 3/4 of it was gibberish. I'm now up to about 50% literacy, maybe 50%.
No,
So.
The worst was like I posted a picture, like a screen cap of my character from Final Fantasy, and then someone who like actually actively plays commented like telling me about their character, and I just had no clue what they were saying. There's just like letters and abbreviations everywhere, and I was just like, what did you just say to me?
Oh, I have more things to look forward to when I play 14. But I know we were saying earlier that 11 and 14, more so 14, is just such a radical shift on how the Final Fantasy universe is in terms of playing. But what non-MMO Final Fantasy could have been like that shift to go somewhere else, other than 13, other than Final Fantasy Corridor Edition? I mean, what Final Fantasy game do you feel made this weird paradigm shift?
Oh, four.
Well, depends. There are different shifts. I mean, the one that's more recently closer to, say, like, where we're at with, like, 13, perhaps 10, because it became more story-focused in a lot of ways, as we talked about earlier.
Well, I'm sorry, Allie, go ahead and finish.
No, I don't really have much.
I have a rough time deciding between 10 and 12. 10 was kind of like the in-between a little bit, because 10 had conditional battle system where everything else had active time, and you still had your 7, you can use all 7 battle, but it still felt like a Final Fantasy game for the most part outside of like the sphere grid, which I thought was pretty intuitive and also inventive. But when you go into Final Fantasy 12, it's very different. It's a different feel altogether, with the license board, with the tactics, with everything. It's a whole different game.
Well, in a lot of ways, I think Final Fantasy 12 should be grouped in with the MMOs. I mean, it's actually more similar to an MMO than not. It's, in my opinion, the best single-player MMO that's ever been built.
Final Fantasy Online Offline Edition.
Yes, exactly. It's a single-player MMO. It's great. I love 12. As Ellie pointed out, it's true. There's different ways of things changing. 10 definitely was a shift, but I really think 4 was a big shift. I mean, if you look at 1 through 3, they barely have characters. The plot is very vague. 4 is what really introduced, a mode of storytelling that I think is true, is consistent even till today. So 4, in my opinion, really defined the storytelling aspect.
Well, what about, I mean, there are different aspects. Is there, like, one in regards to shift for how you say, like, battle in the game, or class systems? There's all kinds of things you could look at it.
I mean, for me, I would suppose it's more of the systems itself, because if you really think about it, 7, 8, and 9 were kind of similar in its system, minus the fact that 7 had materia, 8 had GFs, 9 had items. It was still very familiar with the numbers, your attack powers, your defense. They were very familiar, though it got more simplified from 7 to 8, and I felt like 9 added a little more to it. 10 really simplified the RPG elements. You only had 3 items. You had your weapon, you had your armor piece, and then you had an item. And they kind of showed what your powers were. For the most part, you didn't really manipulate anything beyond that, except for the sphere grid, where you can go through your normal sphere grid, then you can just start breaking the game going other places, which that was the pure enjoyment I got out of 10, which is breaking the hell out of the game.
I see. So...
I guess that's where I was talking about with difference. Now, storytelling difference, there's a huge storytelling difference when you get to 7 and 8.
With storytelling in general, part of why I think 10 is such a shift is, like, even 10's the first one, you have 10-2, things like that, but, I mean, there's no 12-2, so it's hard, but, I mean, there's a 13-2 and 3, so that's in one way, like, I kind of, felt like there was a shift in a couple ways. One, you have more story.
Oh, yeah.
And 2, it's more about building a franchise around, say, 10 or 13 rather than you have just Final Fantasy itself when you have this 10-2, this 13-2, this 13-3, things like that.
Right. And also 12 had Revenant Wings for the DS. And also 12 itself was set in Ivalice, which was the setting also for Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Advanced.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to point out about plot shifts and how the story is told from 7 on is that it really introduced a literary element called the untrustworthy narrator, which is basically the idea that, in a literary context, it's the idea that the reader of the book should not trust the main character's perceptions of events. So if you look at, like the main character may be crazy or maybe hallucinating, you can't trust their memories, you can't trust what they think of people as the reader. Mm-hmm. And you see that in 7 and 8. Obviously Cloud is not who he thinks he is. You don't see it as much in 9. You see it in 10 where Titus, he can't trust his own memories, et cetera, et cetera. So
it's a weird first-person, third-person storytelling view like in books. A lot of times in the first-person perspective, you get the perspective of that character regardless of, what they think is going on, how they perceive things are going on. You kind of see that with Cloud, even though his memory is faulty at times. We're still viewing the game from Cloud most of the time.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I just thought it was an interesting element, the untrustworthy narrator.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely see that.
Though, okay, so you talked about, like, the main series evolving and things like that. Do you want to talk about, like, spin-off things as well? Or?
We can go a little bit into spin-offs, like to Tactics, I'm not as strong with the Game Boy versions, because I don't remember. I just remember the one part where, the one Final Fantasy Game Boy game where you fight the creator.
Well,
that's legend.
Yeah.
I think one really interesting progression, because, you're looking at, like, say, like, even the console or spin-off media, you're also dealing with a change in technology. And I think some of the phone, things you can play on your phone are a little interesting. Like, actually, like, All the Bravest, Final Fantasy thing, I actually found it to be a little bit interesting. I mean, cause it's like kind of a capitalist fanboy trap, but like you just rub the screen while looking at like Final Fantasy sprites, it's playing Final Fantasy music, and I had a friend once describe it to me. It's like you just rub the screen and you receive glorious 16-bit stuff, and it's Final Fantasy stuff, and you can do it while driving, so it's like a hand job, but better. But so...
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. But that's just one thing to, I guess, consider. As technology evolves, so does our gaming, and so does our Final Fantasy, so.
Speaking of unusual control elements, I was reading a Final Fantasy XIV chat log the other day while I was in the middle of a raid. And, there's, 10 different warrior classes now, and one of them is Bard, which can play music. Some guy had taken a USB to PlayStation 2 adapter and hooked up his Guitar Hero controller and was playing Bard in Final Fantasy XIV using a Guitar Hero controller. It was, well, he wiped a couple times, so it didn't work that well, but I'm sure he felt pretty badass when he was doing good.
I have nothing else to say on that. I've seen it done in Dark Souls.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
That is like penultimate using the Guitar Hero controller. I think we digress a little, which was still that was a pretty cool tidbit there. I like Theater Rhythm. I really love Theater Rhythm, but then again, I love the Final Fantasy music. So that's just more or less like, ooh, listen to more music. Okay, I'll go do this again. I get to listen to the same thing like 10 times. That's my personal take on it. It's not really, no challenge to it whatsoever. It's just, I get to listen to a lot of music.
You know, they've started throwing a lot of classic Final Fantasy themes into Final Fantasy XIV. There's a lot of, some of the trials recently. They added, I think there's the Final Fantasy VI combat theme is now in one of the trials. So they're sneaking in all sorts of old school content now through the patches.
Which I really think in the realm of Final Fantasy, one of the big things that will live on in this franchise is the music. Regardless of being the 8-bit realm or 16-bit realm, the 32-bit realm, I feel the first thing that I think with Final Fantasy anymore is not the story, it's the music itself. Because the music actually invokes the emotions from the story. It's more memorable.
I can see that.
But, I mean, if you get to things like 13, it also falls into that pattern of a lot of games today, which is trying to create music that's not necessarily memorable, but it can play over and over, and it's not annoying type thing. I don't know what exactly the term I'm looking for there, but Mike actually has a better description.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think 12 is the game that really first introduced that. If you listen to the 12 soundtrack, because 12 really integrated the field of battle into the world, where the two were one, which is nice because then the music never shifts, right? It's all just one music playing. But that meant that you're listening to the same melody potentially for an hour straight versus, say, FF6 where you get the nice overworld theme, then battle theme, then overworld theme, then battle theme, then overworld theme. Yeah. It's just an hour. So based on that, they really were forced to choose a very sort of subtle melody that's very light, no real strong melody, very kind of weak, but it will never get bad in a way, with the exception of a few places in FF12. I mean, the only real exception to that, I think, is probably the Thawne Coast. But everything else is that sort of repetitive music that works really well in the background.
Unless you're against like a boss battle or whatever, then it goes into its boss music, or if you're against Gilgamesh, the Gilgamesh music or whatever.
Right. But even that's a little bit weaker than previous Final Fantasies.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I think probably 10 is the last one that had a really, really strong soundtrack compared, to later games.
Yeah, 13's that kind of like really pleasant, forgettable music, I think, in a lot of ways.
Right.
The only thing I liked from 13 was the battle music, and that was it. I didn't like any of the overworld music. I didn't like any of the other music associated with 13. It was just like some of the battle music, and that was it. And even then,
I agree. The battle music in 13 is pretty pleasant.
Agreed.
But I feel forgettable as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree it'd be pretty forgettable.
I mean, compared to the 7 soundtrack, I mean, you will never forget the 7 soundtrack or the 6 soundtrack with, the opera music. You will never forget that theme. It really sticks with you much more.
Yeah, or even 9.
Oh, yeah.
And I've never, like, the Black Mage Village or things like that, never forget.
Right.
Which, now I'm going to diverge for just a second. If you ever go to, like, one of the Distant Worlds concerts, that they have the opera singers for the opera song. Oh, that's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
That is amazing. Now we're going back and forth with music and whatnot. I mentioned music being kind of a central anchor point with the Final Fantasy series, one of the central anchor points. But going back to the 16-bit and the 8-bit era, do you think 1 through 6 could still hold up? I mean, I think 4, 5, and 6 would hold up pretty well, but does 1, 2, and 3 still hold up today in terms of gaming?
I think, I don't have really a context for 1 and 2. I think at least with 3, because, 3 and 4 have had updates, for the DS and things like that. If it could hold up without an update, I don't think the DS update necessarily would have been necessary, because if you notice when you play 3, there's actually, like, cutscene, or, like, more, like, detailed cutscenes, the story that they upgraded for a new generation. So I don't think that, maybe they would. I've personally never played 1 or 2, but every time I've asked someone about them, they're like, oh, don't bother with 1, it's so awful, like, play the other ones. So.
Honestly, I don't feel I have the right to have an opinion on it because I started with them. I mean, if you start with them, for you, it's always going to feel like they've held up okay, I think. So I think Allie's got the valuable opinion here, since she came in a little bit later.
I would have to agree with that statement, because I played 1 and then I skipped the 4, and then I didn't play 3 until it was re-released on the DS, and I played 2 as part of Dawn of Souls, so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seemed okay. Like, I'm playing another copy of 1 on my cell phone. So, and that actually plays pretty decent.
Correct me if I'm wrong, at least for 3, for DS, they added a lot of content in regards to, like, story and characters, right? Did they even have names in the original 3?
That I don't know. I don't know in the original 3 if they had
I see. Okay, well then I'm just talking about things I don't know about. Just to move on.
Do you know, Mike?
No, I don't remember. I didn't play 3. I really started at 4.
Okay, you really started at 4. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's fine. So I guess one of the things I wanted to really talk about was 8 versus 13, but we can't really make that. I really want to make that comparison because, why
are you making this like the lesser of two evils conversation?
I am trying to make it the lesser of two evils conversation. But what I can do, since Allie, you've played 8, right?
Minimally, I was bored. It's awful to say. Like, I have friends that really love 8 too. That would be really mad at me.
No, I know people who, like, adore 8, and sometimes that's the only game they play.
But I gotta wonder if they really adore 8, or they're, like, the ultimate hipsters.
No, you know what I think it is? It's that the people who like 8, I think, really like the 8 characters in some way. I know. But they don't actually like the 8 game that much.
Squall's just, like... Unless it's like a matter of like smelly weird gamers relating to some guy who's completely antisocial, like I don't understand what likable qualities there are in Squall.
Well, Squall's probably, just objectively, he's one of the few Final Fantasy characters that they actually tried to make like a pretty boy. Like, Zidane is not, okay? Titus sort of, except
what are you talking about?
Those pants. Yeah.
Cloud has that fantastic spiky hair.
No, let's not talk about that. The point is that they really, with Squall, they tried to make sort of this attractive pretty boy. And for some people, that's something. And, they tried very hard to do a very fulfilling, squishy romance story with Squall and Renoa that that you don't get with some of the other games. So,
But
it's
9 has the best romance story.
You're talking about Vivi and Quina, right?
You don't know what Quina is?
No, you're talking about the Moogles who are always banging, right? Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, you're right. FF9 has the best romance story.
But I guess with 8, I don't know if you two heard about the Final Fantasy 8 theory that after disc 1 of 8, the whole story of Final Fantasy 8 is Squall dying. There's a whole website devoted explaining the details of what happened, after the whole, at the end of disc 1, what happens is, Squall and Renoa and all the people from Alarm Garden decide to do an assassination attempt on Adia, and basically Adia throws a spell at Squall, basically an ice spell, it basically just hits him in the chest. And the theory is from that point he was dying, and what you're playing is basically his dying moments.
Interesting.
I've never heard that.
Which they explain that's why the story becomes very discombobulated. It feels really weird. It explains some of the plot hole elements. But then there's also things that are against it, saying, well, he didn't get hit in the chest. He got hit in the shoulder and that sort of thing. I don't know. It seemed viable when I started reading it, that I'm going, I don't know. It feels like someone was really trying to stretch it to make it fit the facts that were there.
Okay, so I've never heard that before. Could totally be viable, but even if it were viable, I can't forgive Final Fantasy VIII for what it is.
I'm not.
Even if you
I'm
say
not.
that.
I'm not excusing it. Personally, I'm not using that as an excuse to say 8 was an okay product. 8 is dismal. 8 is dismal as a game. I think it has a very weak story in itself. It has a very weak system. It's weak all around. I don't have any other word. I cannot wax enough philosophical on it to say, hey, 8 is a terrible game.
Okay.
Anyways.
Anyways.
Yes, let's get off of 8 because I can talk about the merits on how terrible 8 is. I like 9. I really love 9.
Everyone who actually likes Final Fantasy likes 9.
9 is the fulfillment of the 1 through 6 generation.
It was kind of a love letter to all the fans saying, thank you for sticking with us. Though some people want to say that Final Fantasy IX was a love letter to people saying, hey, we're sorry about 8, here's this. So, I mean, 9's not perfect by any means.
Oh, no, you stop because it is perfect.
It is perfect. I'm sorry, John.
Like,
part ways in this.
No, I mean, look at all, there's all kinds of elements you can look at why 9, if you look at the story, the battle system, things like that, even mini-games, I've never been so satisfied, playing a mini-game that I have playing Chocobo Hot and Cold. It's just not happened. And that story is the perfect story. There's so much to every character, and it has the perfect fairy tale ending that absolutely no Final Fantasy game has. And there's just so much to...
That's true.
There's so many reasons why it's perfect.
Alright, John, why don't we turn that around?
Yeah.
What would you change about 9 that would make it better? Wait for the silence. Alright.
Okay. I just felt... Now, this is my faulty memory coming into play here because I played it once through. When Garland comes in... isn't it Garland that comes in the picture or someone from the other world where Kuja comes over?
Yep.
And I just felt like at some point, okay, this is starting to become a little too convenient plot line wise. And that's my own personal opinion. And even then, it didn't really deter from me playing the game or continuing the game. I just felt that maybe that part could have been extrapolated a little better. Other than that, I like the mini game.
Other than that, it's the perfect game. And even that, again, you think that's the thing about 9 is everyone sort of fits their role perfectly. Garland is this perfect villain,
Yeah.
with the black cape and, everything like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as convenient, that's hardly the biggest overly convenient sort of plot happening in any Final Fantasy.
Oh.
But do you think 9 didn't overreach?
In what sense?
Okay. Let me give a point of reference. 7 had basically a dystopian world, almost weird post-apocalyptic sort of way, had an environmental message. It had a grand scope. Where 9, I don't feel it had that grand scope. Which I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's bad.
No, 9 has an overarching narrative and every single character in regards to identity and things like that. What should you be, or what should one be doing with themselves? That
plot, that element's there. Yes, I agree.
Well, what are you getting at? Are you getting at a grand narrative for the whole story? Because 9 definitely has it. And like I said, there's more than one, and I think the biggest, most prevalent one is in this regards to, this identity. If you look at every character, you say you have Vivi, who's trying to, figure out what his purpose is, and he runs into other black mages, and that kind of flips his world upside down, or Steiner, is also turned upside down when, he's really adamant about serving, his land and things like that, but then he finds out it's corrupt, and,
I guess I'm trying to find inside my own personal mind, why am I opting myself to place, if I had 7 and 9 in front of me, I'm always going to go to 7 versus 9. Even though
that means you don't have taste, is the problem, actually.
Ouch!
I'm sorry.
Wow, that's alright, I'm gonna end on this, no.
No, well, really, like, okay, go on. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
but I did.
it's fine. No, I don't know why I feel gravitated to go towards 7 more. I don't think 7's a perfect game by any means. I can list so many reasons why 7 is such a flawed game, but I still love 7. I mean, if anything, if I was going to go to a Final Fantasy game that I want to keep playing, it's going to be 6, no matter what.
Well, the one thing I'd say about 7 is actually, to some extent, I agree with you that 7 has this grand narrative, ultimate showdown, very nice in that sense. But to me, the grand narrative you're referring to doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy. It's a really radically different shift in the world, and it doesn't feel like it. 9 is the game that brought it all back home.
Right.
And I think there's positive things in both directions. Again, 7's got the very nice grand narrative. Allie's totally right, though. 9 has a really strong theme about identity. And I don't think there's any other game that has such a good theme.
I mean, it's the most thematically cohesive if you want to throw out like a scholarly sentence about the game itself.
I'm going to make a note here saying, find copy of 9 to replay.
Seven to me feels like it just, an everything and the kitchen kind of game. It's Squaresoft, 6 straight games of feeling limited by storage space, and budget, just going all out and saying, what else can we throw in? Okay, motorcycle chase, sure, screw it, let's do it.
Well, they also
sub-game, let's do it. Minigame, snowboarding, let's do it. Let's do a whole snowboarding minigame, and just every possible thing you could want in one game. And that makes it a very good game in the sense that people can play it. And, there's some people that may never finish the game and just spend the entire time snowboarding, right?
Yeah. And there's also the fact that 7 in itself, like you were saying, how much of a shift it was with just the setting, where it's more modern.
Yeah, dramatically more modern, but that's not necessarily a plus either.
No.
So it's in some ways, really scattershot kind of game. It's just got so much in it. When they're going from what was FF6? Was it 24 megs to 3 discs?
Yeah, 3 discs over
100 megs.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost 80 times larger?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge size jump. Just enormous size jump.
No, I agree. You can cram whatever you want into 7 and at some point they're just going, hey, can we do this? Can we do it? And sometimes it felt incomplete because there was just, we want to put this part in, or we want to put this in. Let's grab this and put this in there. And I think when they were starting to work on 8, that's probably the one good thing with 8 is the fact that even though it was a bad story and a bad game, it was a tighter story.
Oh yeah, no, they definitely. It's not just the story too. The whole game world really got focused and trimmed down.
But they had more.
As a positive.
Yeah, but 8, again, going on the bandwagon of 8 being a terrible game, 8 has really bad plot, really bad plot holes. Like, I use Guardian Forces, so I don't know who my friends are.
You know what? It is not really logically coherent to talk about 7 being great and then talk about 8 having plot holes.
I know.
The Phoenix Down plot hole for all time will be the biggest plot hole of any Final Fantasy.
Or like Barrett being like, I want to save the world, but I have to leave Midgar. That is the most important place really early in the game. Like, what is that?
No, the Phoenix Down. The Phoenix Down plot hole and Aeris is just for all time. For all time.
Well, then again, there's another video demonstrating that Cloud killed Aeris and not Sephiroth.
You could probably make like a thing just about Final Fantasy conspiracy theories, maybe.
I know. 10. Let's shift away from 7, 8, 9. Let's go to 10 because we haven't talked about 10 too much. I always feel 10 is the most underrated of the Final Fantasy games.
What?
I think it's underrated. A lot of people, when you talk about 10, it's like, it's 10.
It depends when. So, like, I remember in high school, I was in high school when 10 came out. Or at least 10-2.
God, you're making me feel old.
Oh.
Well, anyways, so I remember a lot of people being like, oh, this is garbage, worst game ever. But then 10 HD came out, and all those people from high school were like, oh, I'm so pumped for 10. I miss 10. I'm so glad I get to play this game on, like, in high def. I'm really happy about it. So it's like, I feel like it was underrated at a point, but now I don't know where all these people that love it came from.
No, I've always said that 10 has probably one of the better stories in the Final Fantasy franchise, I feel. I mean, I love the concept of Sin. The concept of Sin was actually pretty damn cool.
Yeah, no, definitely, the storyline was actually much nicer. I think what really caused people to dislike 10 was the, I'm gonna say it, I thought the dub sucked. There's a whole, obviously, long-standing 30-year-old battle of dubs versus subs, but wherever you sit on that, objectively, 10 is a shitty dub.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you have to blame the Japanese director because they're the ones who signed off on the performance.
Right.
And that's the terrible part.
And if it just had, switchable audio with subtitles, and legitimately turn on the dub if you want it, turn on the sub if you want it with Japanese audio, I think it would have had a much, much better reception.
That's what they should have had in the HD re-release.
Yeah.
That is the one thing I'm actually disappointed about. There is no Japanese audio.
Yep.
Okay. So let's do this. Since I know we've been going about the games, let's actually go into the minutiae of the games a little bit and compare the specific parts of each of the game. Villains.
Ooh.
Best villain in all the franchise.
I mean,
Kefka.
I know
Kefka, because
Kefka.
Gotta go Kefka.
That's what everyone says.
Because
It's true! Because it's true!
What about Kuja?
Kuja...
I mean, you just don't like him because he's wearing a thong on his pants.
Well. First off, no, I don't have a good counterpoint to that. Well, fundamentally, Kuja is the character you can sympathize with, though. There are elements of Kuja that you can sympathize with a little bit. Kefka's just insane. There's no sympathy for Kefka.
And Kefka succeeds in what he wanted to do, destroy the world.
Yes.
Now, you're talking about sympathy, being a sympathetic villain. I think Sephiroth is the most sympathetic villain.
What? He's
Really?
just crazy. Like, I don't sympathize with him. He's just fucking insane.
But also the fact that he was
He's like Norman Bates, constantly going on about his mom.
Well, he was also kind of created, too, and he didn't really ask for it. He's just kind of, okay, what the hell's going on? But then he's kind of crosses a line and just starts, okay, I'm just going to come in and destroy the world now because I have mom issues. But at a point, though, I felt he was very sympathetic. Whereas, and then we're going to go back on the 8 train and say, Ultimecia is like, who are you and where did you come from and why do I care?
I don't know. I mean, I don't recall a moment where I felt sympathy for Sephiroth. I think Kefka, the insanity of Kefka made him he knew what he was doing, and I think makes him less of a good villain than Kefka, the real insanity. It's, the Heath Ledger Joker, truly insane kind of great villain.
Right. No, and I agree. That's why I love Kefka, because he is just fucking nuts.
Can we talk about the end plot of 12 at all?
Let's not. No, I mean, go ahead.
Because I think there's an interesting discussion to have there. Part of this whole plot going on in the background is that you have this sort of council of celestial beings, the Okuria, and you've got this one outcast from there, Venat, who is controlling basically the end bad guys against the Okuria. The end bad guys, the Vayne Soledar and everything, they're bastards. but I'm actually very sympathetic to Venat. You know? If you actually look at what Venat was trying to do in 12, which is, sort of let humanity make its own decisions free from the Okuria. And that's what I took away from the plot anyway. That he wanted to, the Okuria was constantly controlling history, and Venat was, rebelling against that. I'm sympathetic to that. I think that's actually kind of something I would, in principle, support, right?
Now, I have a confession. I played
Yes.
140 hours of Final Fantasy 12. I didn't beat it.
Yes, I can understand that. I can totally understand that. But, I mean, one doesn't really ever beat an MMO, John. So, I mean, obviously.
With it being the single-player MMO.
Right.
But no, I knew a lot about the plot, and I knew about Venat and Vayne and how he was controlling him, and so yes, it does actually make sense, and I can actually agree to that that could be, he could be a sympathetic villain. What about Zeromus or Golbez?
I mean, they're just sort of pure expressions of evil, or Zeromus is anyway, so...
Right.
But that doesn't make them the same kind of insanity as Kefka. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, because they're just there. I mean, Zeromus just kind of like, I felt like he was just kind of a villain that just kind of appeared. Kind of like Ultimacy's like, oh, I'm here, I'm the villain, beat me.
Right. And Zeromus, if the theory of Zeromus is that it's just almost a force of nature rather than an actual character, That's sort of the impression I get.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Tactics.
Ooh.
I love the fact that the ending of Tactics, where it's like, oh, you saved the world and whatnot, and your character's a heretic, an enemy of the church.
For all time, into hiding.
Yes.
Yeah.
And anyone who speaks out about it is dead.
Yep.
So hence, you never win.
Tactics is a complex one. And, in a lot of ways, you can really see Tactics was a huge influence in how storytelling occurred in 12, So, Tactics is probably the most influential game on Final Fantasy that is not part of the main series.
Right.
It really shifted how the stories are being told even later on.
Mm.
But man, I had a high learning curve with that game because I never played that kind of a game before when I first got it.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I played one game like it before, but not Final Fantasy games, so it doesn't matter.
Well, like
No, don't worry about it. It's there's like a Japanese really popular like hentai game that like you like hear me out. So, Utawari Rimino, or like Underwater Ray Romano, whatever you're gonna call it, like has a really fantastic story, and it plays like Final Fantasy Tactics, but there are also sex scenes in it, because at the time, a doujin group could not make a game without putting sex in it. So it's got like the funnest gameplay, and it's like got a really good story, but then just randomly, like at the end of like your Final Fantasy Tactics-esque battle, you just have sex thrown at people in the game. So... I had played that before I had played Tactics, and once I played Tactics, I was like, oh, this is like Utawari Rumino, and it's like, someone's like, no, flip that.
Well, I know my answer now when people ask me what would improve Tactics.
Oh, God. I'm broken. Oh, man. So, two more things. And since we talked about 7 quite a bit, will 7 get a re-release? Do you think?
God, I hope not. It's like on the lowest priority list, lowest in the priority list for me. I mean, if I think about what games really need a re-release, well, 4 got a DS re-release, and that was, by all accounts, fantastic. 6 really needs a re-release.
Especially, I think 6 is more dire considering, like, the trying to fix of the numbering of Final Fantasy, because when Final Fantasy 3 hit Steam, a lot of people were like, whoa, well, is it really 3? Or is it...
Well, I think 6 got one re-release on the Game Boy Advance. But that's it. Now that 6 is also on cell phone, too, so...
Yeah, but it really needs an HD remake. And, every time I see people... in Final Fantasy XIV, you can actually get a suit of Magitech armor and ride around in it. And every time I see them bounding around, it just makes me ache so hard for an FF6 remake.
That is the reason why I wanted 14, is because I saw Magic Armor and was like, alright, I'm gonna go buy 14, because I want to ride in that.
Time for you to renew your subscription.
I know!
They're awesome. And I don't know if you know this, when you get them, they can actually fire their cannons and shit. Like, it's not just a mount, it can actually fire. It doesn't do any damage. But you can actually shoot stuff with them.
Oh,
they're fantastic. Oh, they're so good.
I'm crying right now, I'm crying.
Do it, Sean. You could get the armor in about 30 or 40 hours, you could have the armor.
Oh, jeez. That means I have to stop playing Dragon Age.
I mean, I don't know why there's a problem with that.
What's the downside to that?
That means I can't have my other characters lusting after each other in Dragon Age.
But
Final Fantasy.
But 14. But
Magitech armor.
Lalafell.
Master Race.
So, what game, if you had to choose one game, I think I know what Alex's answer is going to be, but if you choose one Final Fantasy game to just keep playing, like every year, which one?
9.
Actually, at this point for me, it might be 14, just because it's a big game.
That's the thing, though. You gotta distinguish that, because the MMOs aren't fair, because they're constantly adding content. Like, there's not gonna be a new piece of the story to 9.
How about non-MMO?
9.
I might go 12, and it's not because necessarily it's the greatest game, but it's, I think, a pretty solid game and requires very little thought. So I think my favorite, sick day activity is just play 12 on one screen and watch some random TV series on a second screen. And it's really nice because it just requires so little attention to just kind of walk around and kill stuff. I alternate between describing 12 as the best single player MMO ever or Squaresoft's second best racing game, because you basically just steer and try and avoid the walls.
Yes?
It's the second best racing game because of the existence of Chocobo Racing, which is their Mario Kart equivalent that they did in the PlayStation era, which was just Chocobos racing on roller skates. I'm not joking. It's fantastic. It's a great game.
Well, then again, are we just counting like the PlayStation era, or are we going to go into the Nintendo era? Because then you can say Rad Racer.
That wasn't a Squaresoft game. Was it?
Yes, it is.
Rad Racer was a Squaresoft? No way.
Yes, because
really?
Uematsu did the music for it.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. You're totally right. Wow, I didn't know that.
I knew a few things about a few things. For me, I always flop between 6 and 7, because I will play 7 every so often, but I love 6. I love 6 story a lot more. I love 6's characters a lot. I love the system, and it's one game I can just not really get tired playing, to be honest. Even though it's not as powerful as 7, or in terms of scope, or that's not like 12, but I feel 6 is almost like a perfect game in a way. If it had like an HD upgrade and whatever, I still will keep on playing that game.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. So, any other closing thoughts, closing opinions about just Final Fantasy in general? Will it live past 15? Do you think it will live past 15?
I think if the franchise tends to uphold things like being a better looking games than most games at the time, and doing this good integration of the story with the gameplay and things like that, I think it can hold up. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's going to hold up in the form that the older fans want. So.
My answer to that is, I think yes, and here's why. Because no company is perfect. Every company is going to screw up. And how a company responds to screw-ups is what defines whether or not that company will live. Mm-hmm. And that is the single best lesson from Final Fantasy XIV. If anyone's not familiar with what happened with 14, it launched and it was awful. And you can do a lot of things with an awful game. You can respond to it in a lot of different ways. Squaresoft did the absolute perfect thing. They changed who was in charge of it.
They made the game completely free, and they said, we're going to make it completely free until we fix it. And then they fixed it. And they fixed every problem people had with it, and then they improved on that, and then improved on that, and it gets better and better. So it's how companies respond and learn that really defines, is this company going to be around in the long run, in 20 years? And 14 is the perfect example of how a company can learn. I mean, look at EA and SimCity. Did EA learn from SimCity? Does anyone think EA actually learned their lesson from SimCity? No. Lots of other game companies are not actually learning their lessons. Squaresoft actually knows how to fix things now. We know that. So yes, they're going to be around.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you guys for actually taking time to actually just talk to me in this the first of many roundtables that I'll actually be doing. This was actually pretty good. We went through a fair amount of topics. So again, I really appreciate it, and probably have you guys on again.
Great. Looking forward to it.
All right, cool.
See you.
See you later, and I will. I wanted to mention a few things at the end of the podcast. The opening was Searching for Friends from Final Fantasy VI, and the ending theme that you heard was the victory fanfare from Final Fantasy X. We'll see you in the next episode.